I'm amazed at the number of people who freeze in a disastrous situation, like a sinking ship. People who survive tragedies like that always report that there's not nearly the amount of panic and confusion that you'd expect. A lot of people freeze in place and simply can't move, even as the water is rising around them. Families have been split up in situations like this, where two of them can move, but the other three can't. Freezing is part of the same process that triggers the fight and flight response, and usually occurs when people can't do anything to actively exit or combat what's causing them stress. Freezing is a really old response evolutionally speaking, and is something of a last-ditch way the body tries to save itself. As a result, people tend to go into fight and flight first, and then eventually freeze if they still can't control the stress they're experiencing. On the practical side, this has some hugely important implications for helping people in distress. If someone who is panicking suddenly becomes much less responsive or almost catatonic, they're not okay. It can look like they've calmed down, but most likely they've just entered the freeze response. That means that as their stress does reduce, they're going to go back into fight and flight before they actually get to a point where they feel better, and we have to be ready for that. On a more mundane note, in our personal life we also need to look for evidence of freeze in response to daily stressors. If you're super anxious about work, and then start feeling less anxiety, but also tired or zoned out, you may be entering freeze. People mistake this for merely being worn out, when in reality their body is struggling to manage chronic stress. False memories. How you can implant false memories in someone over time. And they believe they are real and their reactions are based on their own reality. When I was 9 years old I was hospitalized with severe asthma that nearly killed. Blood oxygen level was 62. The entire hospital stay was such a blur because my brain was not functioning properly. Both my parents were in custody battles and tried to convince me the other parent never once stepped into my hospital room. The last time I spoke with my mother, about a decade ago, I am sure she would still say my father never visited me. Luckily my granny, the voice of reason and sanity in my childhood, simply said to me, "They both visited you, they are both telling you lies." The irrationality of humans when it comes to some basic decision-making. For example, imagine you wanted to buy a nice pair of jeans. So you go to the store and find a pair you really like. The price is $60. Before you buy it you check your phone and find out a store 15 minutes away has the same exact pair for $20. Would you make the drive and go get the cheaper pair? Most people say yes, they would. Now imagine that you've saved up a bunch of cash and are gonna go to the store for a nice refrigerator. You find the one you like for $2,440. Before you buy it you find the same exact one 15 minutes away for $2,400. Assuming you couldn't price match, would you make the drive out for the cheaper one? Most people surveyed say no, they would not, despite being the same amount of savings. Most people, when asked why they would drive out for one and not the other, cite the relative difference in price, but this is an irrational behavior. A rational behavior would dictate that it shouldn't make a difference. Regardless of the relative savings, $40 extra in your pocket is $40 extra in your pocket, and that's all that should be the only factor in a rational being. Dreaming. Even though everyone does it, it's amazing that our minds create virtual realities for us nightly. If you can lucid dream, it can be more entertaining than any game technology has invented. But why do our brains create nightmares? It seems so masochistic for your own mind to create nightmarish scenarios that would never happen in real life, or simply relive bad memories over and over. Normally our biology avoids pain at all costs. But the brain seems to obsess over it while we dream. Someone replied, "Okay, first I need to explain why we dream at all." The most accepted answer is that our brain is warming its circuits. Think about when you try to take a 20-minute nap, but it's 4 hours, 90% of the time you don't dream because your brain thinks it doesn't need to stay active during that short time. That's why time feels like mud when you wake up, sometimes for an entire hour. When people have nightmares it's usually because we are nervous or scared about something, or we experienced a traumatic event. Think about this, you live through your house burning down, and you burned your arm badly. That's no small thing. When you go to sleep your brain will try to make connections to that day, or week, or even year, and all it gets is trauma because that's the biggest thing. It makes loose connections based on that, which is why you will have dreams about falling, or drowning, or being attacked. Your brain is trying to familiarize itself with different traumatic events, so if you find yourself in another you have less chance of dying. It's not always experiencing trauma, it can also be because you have anxiety about an upcoming event. Imagine you have a big test coming up, and you didn't study. Your subconscious brain doesn't recognize a test as a threat, but it does recognize your anxiety. So it tries to help by making you familiar with different scenarios. Déjà vu. To have such a strong feeling that an instance has happened before is crazy. Like you experienced it in the past, or dreamed of it. I met a woman years ago who claimed to have déjà vus that lasted several minutes instead of a few seconds. She wound up going into the psyche ward over it. She said it feels like watching a recording of your own life instead of actually living it. I think it has to do with the way memories are stored in your brain. Some feedback loop kicks in and makes you feel like you've experienced the moment before. That's just a guess though. Stuff like this is nearly impossible to study in a lab. The placebo effect. The idea that belief in something can actually have a positive impact on the body just seems so crazy to me. Also helped me realize inversely why stress and anxiety can take such a toll on you. Funny enough, placebo also works, when you know it's placebo. Somehow, deep down, there is something in you that wants to believe, despite all reasonable arguments against it. Also nocebo is a thing. When you expect something to harm you, it will. It makes a lot of treatments complicated. On one hand you want the patient aware of the side effects, on the other, you don't want them to generate them by the nocebo effect. The Troxler effect. A psychological phenomenon where if one is put into a dimly lit room, then look at their self in the mirror for an extended period of time, they will see things in the mirror, but only the mirror. It is caused by the human brain being able to only experience so little at a time. There are things you aren't paying attention to and therefore don't experience. For instance, your blinking pattern or how the air feels, your brain deems it irrelevant so it just cuts them off to process other stuff. When in the dimly lit room looking at the mirror, your brain deems stuff in the mirror irrelevant and just simply removes it from your sight, but it still has to put something there, but because it's irrelevant and doesn't know what to put there, it tries its best to fill in that void and in doing so, makes something weird happen. I'm pretty sure there was an instance where someone tried this, and their mouth stretched out across their cheeks. The brain didn't know what to put on the cheeks because it was deemed irrelevant so it tried to fill the gap and failed. One of the most popular cases of this would be Bloody Mary. This could also happen without a mirror. Ever just be in your room and out of the corner of your eye you see something looking at you, peeking around the door, but when you focus on it, nothing was there. That would be the Troxler effect. Dissociative disorders. A dissociative disorder is a mental disorder that involves experiencing a disconnection and lack of continuity between thoughts, memories, surroundings, actions and identity. People with dissociative disorders escape reality in ways that are involuntary and unhealthy and cause problems with functioning in everyday life. I don't have a dissociative disorder so to say, but the scariest symptom of my severe anxiety is dissociating. The world does not look as real. The sunlight on the earth looks superficial, sounds are a little quieter or much louder, houses and trees look a little different. Like it's a hyper-realistic rendering of the world that's almost spot on but not exactly. I feel like I'm dreaming and become completely numb emotionally. I'm just there, separated from everything and feel like I'm not real. I could stare straight ahead for hours in this state and not think of a single thing. It's awful and I would trade that mental response for a panic attack any day. The amount of words we use changes how we act. People who speak Spanish are less likely to blame someone for dropping something, because the language is the thing was dropped rather than you dropped the thing. Australian Aborigines have no words for left, right, etc. Instead they use north, east, south, and west. As a result, they almost always know what direction they are facing, even inside buildings with no exterior view. Deaf children in Africa using a made-up sign language that had not developed signs for describing positioning, under, over, to the right of etc., and when tested, they could not find a hidden object, even when they watched it be hidden. They couldn't tell themselves in their own minds where to look for it, and so they couldn't find it. Controlling language can control thoughts. If you take away words that help people visualize things you don't want them to know, those ideas fade from possibility. How laughter affects people. Laughter is basically the yin to stress is yang, which inspires me to make people laugh when I can, as I don't know what they're going through. Laughter increases things like dopamine, and can even help soothe physical pain sometimes. Even smiling, lifting the corners of your mouth, alone has positive effects on you, even if you force it. The human brain is a weird and messed up thing. It's like millions of years of spaghetti code in there. The bystander effect. Everyone thinks they would help if something happens, but the effect says that the more people there are, the less someone is going to help. I experienced this today on my commute. I started to get really dizzy and get tunnel vision. I was too out of it to ask for help, and everyone was just ignoring me. Until this one little old lady bullied someone into giving me their seat. All of a sudden I was surrounded by help, someone was fanning me, another person gave me tissues, etc. I'm so incredibly grateful for that woman who stopped to ask if I was alright. Why people have favorites. Like a favorite color or a favorite flower. Not being able to choose could mean death. Therefore the brain collects fragments of positive memories, which will guide you throughout the rest of your life. One of these fragments could be that you've a preference for the color red, because you associate it with a lot of childhood memories, Charizard, Ash Ketchum hat, Pikachu cheeks, etc. Synesthesia. This happens when you experience one sensory stimulus and it triggers another. For example, you hear a splash and think of the color blue. Or trying to describe songs by color. I get this quite vividly with tastes. If I see a plastic fork, I always taste ketchup for some reason. The gambler's fallacy, specifically, how the same series of events can lead to two different conclusions. Assume you have a perfectly fair coin, you toss it 5 times and get 5 heads. You then ask 2 people what they think the 6th toss will be. Person A thinks that heads is obviously on a roll, so he bets on heads. Person B thinks that heads has happened too many times, which means that tails has to come up, so he bets on tails. They're both wrong, the odds of the 6th throw remain the same, regardless of what happened in the past. The effect of a person's environment, expectations and upbringing on schizophrenia. Specifically schizophrenics that hear voices or hallucinate. In a lot of societies, these voices are usually aggressive, dark, cruel, or they simply torture the one experiencing them, calling names and undermining them. In others, usually more spiritual societies, the voices are calm, benevolent and actively trying to help the listener. It is thought that this is the result from how those societies see the schizophrenic. In most, it's seen as a horrible mental disease, in popular culture and media even dangerous. This stigma gives the person involved a negative view of their mental condition, and causes them to internally demonize it. And exactly that creates the evil voices, they believe it is negative so it becomes more negative. After all, the voices are a figment of their own imagination. In some cultures, schizophrenics aren't labeled that, but are seen as shamans or priests, or a gifted person with a strong spiritual connection. The voices are interpreted as guides, deceased ancestors, or even God self. They don't perceive it as an evil, so the voices do not become evil. The person hearing them doesn't suffer that much from it. Of course, feeling a sense of grandeur because of your mental state is also not a healthy thing, but for the one involved it is a better alternative than being tortured by voices, telling you you're trash or that you should do horrible things, or just screaming, making noise. It can be treated with antipsychotics, to a certain degree, but it would be lovely if one day we as a society could look at schizophrenia in a more healthy manner, so that those who have it aren't as plagued by it, because they have a more neutral view of it. I hope it is possible, someday. Cognitive dissonance. If our actions don't match up with our opinions, beliefs, wishes, etc., something will give, and either our actions will change or our mindset will. Doesn't sound very interesting until you use this to hack your life in a sense. Ever heard of the law of attraction? It's kind of like this. The law of attraction claims that if you want something, just pretend like you already have it. Envision that you have it and you live it. Want to lose weight? Envision you at your ideal weight every night. Sounds like complete BS, and in a sense it is, but it applies to cognitive dissonance, and if you play your cards right it works. For me, I was a very shy person. I wanted to become talkative and get friends and guys. So, I would tell myself, I'm not shy. People love me. I have tons of friends. My beliefs did not match up with my actions. I wouldn't talk to people, but eventually something gave and I started to act in accordance to my beliefs. Either you'll give up on pretending or you'll become how you believe yourself to be. Something to think about. Law of attraction isn't a proven thing, but cognitive dissonance is.